Hey everybody, this is Gaynor Meilke, and this is Tea with Miss G, and it is truth, empowerment, and action served up with a cup of wisdom. So my goal with this series has really been to talk about topics that are not always talked about in a way that empowers people to take action and change it, because I think that is one of the missing pieces for a lot of people. We can talk about trauma, but then what do you actually do to empower yourself and others to act in a different way or to take action and get out of a harmful situation? So today I'm going to talk about what this um, T anagram used to be. I guess it's not an anagram, it's a abbreviation for trauma, empowerment, and action. But I'm going to start um, refreshing it and call the T truth, empowerment, and action, because the truth really is seeing why we're feeling traumatized, and it's going to kind of feed more directly into the book that I'm working on, Perfect Storms and Crooked Rainbows, which is both a memoir and an action plan for empowering yourself to get out of um, trauma by telling the truth and taking action. But today I wanted to talk about a serious subject, and I think it's appropriate that it's in the first episode in the truth era of this Tea with Miss G. And I'm going to title this episode Stopping Drinking the Cruel Aid and Abstaining from the Patriarchal Punch. And sadly, that could be uh, a double entendre for punch, as in drinking something that's spiked with harmful substances, and also punch as in physical aggression, because uh, make no mistake, if you are a victim of any type of abuse, and especially physical abuse right now, you need to call a hotline, and there are many of them. You can find them on the internet, and we will put a number in the description for this podcast for any type of physical violence. Today, I'm going to talk about the psychological and emotional violence that goes unnoticed, and in many cases, it happens behind closed doors, out of public view, and that's how abusers manipulate their victims. And also, that's why so many people are in unhealthy relationships, because we've kind of normalized abusive behavior between spouses and significant others, and dating violence is also another big problem in our society. And I think, unfortunately, more people, and especially more women, because it tends to affect more women. The statistics don't lie about that. It's become something that men and women, in some cases, are learning online and trying to use it against their significant other. So sadly, even though, you know, many women are smart and they're very articulate and well put together, these covert tactics often start so slowly that you don't even realize what's happening. Now, I've talked a little bit before about my own experience, and today I'm going to talk more fully about it, because I think that it can be helpful for other people I know that I really had no idea at the level of abuse that I was being, um, I guess, a victim of for so many years in my marriage. And that was verbal and emotional abuse. And towards the end, it was getting close to physical abuse, very aggressive behavior. Once I filed for divorce, and my ex-husband didn't like that, of course, because he was losing control. Um, but he also, for 20 plus years, emotionally and psychologically abused me by yelling at me, by blaming me for things that weren't my fault, for making his discomfort my problem, and complaining really about my existence. Um, he spent money and then didn't tell me about what he was spending money on. But then if I spent, a few dollars here or there, I would be the first to hear about it. And that's financial abuse, even though I worked full time and made my own money. When I wanted to go back to school, he didn't want me to. And so I ended up having to get a job that would pay for at least part of it and work ungodly hours so that I could get my graduate degree while I was raising my daughter and working full time. But his only complaint besides the money was that it was going to take away from the time that I could spend with him. And while that's, valid, it's also like a sacrifice that you should make in a healthy arrangement so that your um, spouse, who you're supposed to care about, could be fulfilled and also make more money, which would have benefited the household. In addition to that, he verbally and emotionally abused our daughter by yelling at her, making her feel inadequate when she couldn't get her homework right. And the thing is, on the flip side, at work, in public with his parents, he was, the nicest guy. And this is not uncommon because I have a second story about a relationship that I was in that was very manipulative, and coercive control was used. And I don't say this lightly. I didn't even know what it was until I managed to get myself away from the situation and do research and realize that I was in a trauma bond. So I'm going to talk about trauma bonds because my ex-husband had mental health issues. He would not address them. I asked him to take medication. He went to therapy at the beginning of our marriage. We went to therapy towards the end of the marriage, and he just really was not able or willing to put any effort into it. He told me he didn't want to take medication because he would lose his edge at work, but he didn't care if he lost his temper with me. And he had done so for, 20 years basically. And because, by the time I got married to him, I didn't even know that he was going to become as abusive as he did. And that started right after we got married. And by then, it was really kind of too late. Nobody had ever told me that I could get divorced. It just didn't, nobody in my family did that. I didn't talk about it because I didn't think that you should talk about your spouse out of, you know, out of your relationship. I'd read that. I tried to ask him how I could make him happier. If he, if there was a different job that he wanted, if I could help him, he told me to go away and not bother him. Or if I brought anything up, not even about the relationship, but like anything, if I didn't want to go to his drunk fest work party and be hit on by his boss, he told me not to give him a hard time about it. And like that was it. And so I started not going and I started doing my own thing and he still didn't care. And, you know, he just complained he didn't like being alone. Well, I don't like being alone and yelled at either. So everything from taking the garbage out, which I didn't do right, to walking across the floor during his work hours because the ceiling made a noise, so I wasn't allowed to like go to the kitchen on a whim to get a snack because it made too much noise for him. I had too much frozen yogurt in the freezer, so uh, he was allowed though to go and fill a freezer with meat. It was a little bit ridiculous and it was abusive. But the worst part was that when I talked to him about it, he didn't even care. So he had 20 years of opportunities to figure this out. And I told him multiple times about, I gave him the analogy of the love bank when you keep making withdrawals by hurting somebody and yelling at somebody. You need to make deposits too. He didn't care. He didn't care when I cried. He didn't care that he was yelling at me on a beach in front of a bunch of people with my daughter and told me that no, he didn't want another child with me, which is fair, but you don't have to yell it in public. And having a meltdown at an airport because one of the suitcases was overweight. These are all things that really happened. And I took it all in stride because sadly, I grew up with this, but it wasn't my dad, it was my mom. So this is how you come to feel familiar in these chaotic situations. And then my ex would turn around and tell me that I was too anxious and I would take on a lot of stuff because this is how I got through my life. I got through my life by working. I started working when I was 12 and I just wanted to get out of my house. And so my whole life has been built around trying to escape through productive means because I don't want to take drugs and I don't drink because I've seen what that does to people, unfortunately, up close. But when you trace back the roots of addiction and that, I mean, addiction is really a disconnection where somebody cannot be connected to themselves or others because of, the pain that they feel inside. And so they're trying to numb it. And then I'm sure that my ex also had like issues in terms of, you know, he had definitely some pornography issues and also um, what really kind of ended the marriage for me finally after I woke up and stopped drinking this Kool-Aid of protecting him was when he came home with an STD. And, you know, it wasn't even that because I was kind of like so numb. I was like, oh, okay. Um, it was that he asked me not to tell his parents. And it was kind of like, okay, you're not even really that concerned about me. You're concerned about your parents. When I filed for divorce, his biggest concern was that he would be alone. He didn't care that our like relationship was ending. He only cared when it cost him something, and it was going to cost him his image, and it was going to cost him some money. And when I say some money, I mean half of my money that I had made when I was working full time and putting money into our joint account. And he actually said to me when I filed for divorce, that I hadn't paid a major bill in 20 years. Yeah, that's because he paid all the bills out of the joint account, which I never saw. So, no, I didn't physically pay a bill, but I paid for lots of things. Like I paid for the remodel of our kitchen right before I left. And I paid for a lot of my daughter's things. I paid for my own things. And I ran a business. I paid for my business expenses. So clearly, he didn't respect any of the work that I did inside or outside of the home. And he also wanted to try to charge me rent in our house that was half mine. Um, so that it would make it even harder for me to leave. So, the list can go on and on and on, but these are the types of things that I kind of just rolled with it because that's what I was taught to do. And now, sadly, I'm, the silver lining of this particular situation with my marriage is that my daughter has seen what can happen when there's, just a complete and utter like disregard for the fact that as a married couple, you need to at least try to work on things. And I'm sure that although the divorce was difficult for her, it's turned out luckily for the best. And, it's certainly been a growth period for all of us. Now, on to section two of my truth telling here. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I certainly didn't even know any of this existed. And I was in a really horrible mental and emotional state for about 2.5 years because of a relationship that I was in after my divorce. And I think that you might see videos online about narcissism. You might see videos online about antisocial um, people. You might see videos about, the dark triad and, borderline personality, but actually like seeing it up close is a whole different ballgame. And I met this person online and, as the like typical, like it's textbook, as the story goes, great, great guy on paper, great neighbor, great dad, or so we think. And then slowly but surely, the little digs and cuts, when I first met him, he wanted to know a lot about me and asked a lot of questions. You know what else he said, which was kind of interesting now I'm looking back. Because I wasn't looking to get married again or anything like that. I just thought, well, I should try dating. And I think probably it was a pathway into doing some of what I'm doing now. But he said I don't, tell people that I love them other than my kids, and all that changed 3 months later because he wanted to try to like glue me in there. And he asked me like what my pant size was and what how much I weighed. And so he started learning more about me. And maybe I even told him I'd had an eating disorder. So he started playing on like my physical looks. And we went uh, to a beach location, and he's talking about how he knows he shouldn't like look at other women, but oh, look at that, but oh, I know I shouldn't say things like that. So he's like testing me. And that was a theme. And I don't know whether he actually like preyed on women or not, but his brother was put in jail for child porn. And that's public record. So I'm not saying anything that the public doesn't already know. And there was definitely, he created this triangulation with this neighbor woman, saying that if he wasn't dating me, he would be dating somebody like her. So of course, like making me feel insecure in the relationship with this married woman with two small children, married to like a doctor. She was training to be a child psychiatrist, and he like, I don't know whether he had a real crush on her, but like he used that multiple times to try to make me feel bad about myself. And that was a theme that went on and on. I caught him looking at porn, which he, of course, lied about in his kitchen, and made up some excuse that because he worked for the government, that it was a government like thing that he always needed to like shut down his computer when his kids were around, and he was just doing that, which was sad. Um, so I started to kind of see a lot of these little signs, but I was like, I haven't been dating for a while, like a long time. And so, this is just like kind of ridiculous. So, long story short, what I found out about myself through this process, because we never lived together, thank goodness, because one, I would never live with somebody that I didn't feel 100% comfortable with, and I always felt a little bit on edge. But he proposed to me, and I was like, yeah, that's, I did love him, and I did not at that time realize the depth of this coercive control paradigm and how far he actually was into this patriarchy. So he would often say that he was concerned about his younger son watching Andrew Tate, and I actually now think he was. I think that I also think that he had a problem with lying, and he didn't tell me that he was married to his second or to his first wife twice until somebody else brought it up. And he hadn't ever told me for about a year. And I was like, oh, he said he didn't know how to bring it up. Okay, fair enough. But she left after 3 years. I'm like, now I know why. So she left and then came back. And then they had two kids. And I can only imagine what that was like. So through all of this, I started to get one, uh, anorexia, and two, because he was always looking at other women. And when I say looking at other women, I mean like craning his neck back. And I saw him do that. I called him out on it multiple times. And he's like, oh, nobody's ever said that to me before, which of course is probably bogus because I'm sure that other people have. It was like really obvious. He was like telling me how he can't help but notice his son, like his teenage son's like friends who like came to his house, like a very, very strange. Still, I was like, okay, I told him, I said, like, this is like bizarre. And yeah, it was the knife and the band-aid, as Lisa Sony says in her like content. And I think you should check out Lisa Sony and um all of her betrayal bond, trauma bond, and betrayal blindness, all of these things. Um, you know, but part of the coercive control that I also experienced, which really raised like red flags, was the financial piece. So after we got engaged and went on this trip, it was almost like my abuser thought that realized like, oh my gosh, like if I marry this person, I'm gonna have to like, share money. And so, he immediately is like, well, I bring more to the table because he was 10 years older than me. And I'm like, okay, thinking like, okay, somebody who like actually wants to be in a partnership, it shouldn't be like this, like vindictive about their money. And, anyway, it became have an issue, and I didn't want his money. I make my own money, and you know, have all my own investments, etc. So it, I think too, it was, he always said, because I'm self-employed, oh, you can be on my benefits and all that. And it's like, well, you'd have to marry me and I'd have to live with you for that. And, I, by this time, was putting on the brakes. But he continued to do the like hot, cold, he stonewalled me, like all of these things. And it was through all of this trauma and abuse and manipulation that I finally realized that I was facing something that was not just normal relationship problems. And that's something else that Lisa Soni and Dr. Ramani talk about in their content. And I did seek professional help. I became certified in conscious parenting and conscious life coaching with Dr. Shafali, who's a trained psychologist. And this is when I started to realize that I needed the radical awakening of Dr. Shafali to see that I had been in this uh, abusive relationship not once, but twice. Three times if you count my family of origin, and more because there's multiple members there. But it really shifted my whole understanding that of how I needed to protect myself, because we talk about boundaries, but it's more than boundaries. It's seeing these dynamics for what they are. And most of the time it's control and lack of mental health help. But on the second relationship, what I learned about people who employ these type of tactics, like one, I don't think they have any remorse, and two, they can't necessarily help themselves, but they haven't learned and ingrained the fact that their behavior is not normal and it's very harmful, because I was very, very depressed and almost like suicidal over this because I had been diminished and demeaned so much. I said disrespected, but it was more than that. Like he was basically trying to dismantle me psychologically and emotionally so that I would stay, and then try to be overbearing financially, so I became aware that this was not right. My nervous system, I was very like anxious when I was there, and I was like, why am I so anxious? And I realize now it was because I didn't feel safe at all. And I ended up maintaining my separate residence, which I'm glad that I did, working super hard so that I didn't need like anything, and eventually trying to figure out what was happening. And it ended up being too bad of a situation to stay in. And we tried therapy, couples counseling. But what I realized was, like, I kind of laugh at myself now, is that therapy was not going to help this. That this was like an ingrained, as my daughter said, personality flaw or illness that I wasn't going to be able to overcome. And as Lisa Soni says in her content, like, you can't love them out of this. So I have to love myself instead. And that's such a cliche. And it's true though. And that, I guess, is what the lesson is. And the lesson for me coming out of all of sort of like this being drunk on this Kool-Aid and patriarchal punch is that um, there's actually really nothing wrong with me, that I've been reacting my whole life to a lot of people, and it's made me pretty sick. But I feel better than I have in a long time now, and I want to help other people as well recognize this, because I think like waking up to it and recognizing it is the first step, because it's really easy for these abusive people to diminish your reaction and your feeling, which in and of itself is abusive. Sort of my both of my romantic partners and my mother too would say I'm too sensitive, and basically try to stop me from saying anything because they didn't want to deal with it. And that silenced me for a long time, like a long time. But, I did a Reiki session about, I don't know, 8 years ago now. And I remember her saying to me that I had a lot of energy in my voice and in my throat, but I needed to find a way to use it. And I think I found my way now. So you'll be hearing a lot more in this Truth, Empowerment, and Action series. Thank you for listening to a little bit of my story. I hope that it's helped you. And if you recognize these patterns, or you feel like you're being abused, you're unsafe, then do reach out to a mental health professional, or at the very least, a friend or colleague or me, and we can point you in the right direction of resources. But there are plenty online. If you look up domestic violence hotlines, um, you can find those numbers pretty easily. So do take care, be well, and let's all treat each other with the truth about ourselves, make it empowered, take action, and I hope that this little bit of wisdom will bring you clarity and hopefully peace and health in the near future.